The Stellar Haven, a massive interspecies research vessel, drifted silently through the Andromeda sector. Its corridors hummed with the soft chatter of 100 different species, all working together in the name of galactic unity and scientific progress. Among them were two humans, Luis Martinez, a xenobiologist specializing in juvenile alien development, and Louisa Chen, an environmental engineer who kept the ship's life support systems running smoothly. What made humans particularly fascinating to the rest of the crew wasn't their intelligence or their resourcefulness, though both were impressive. It was their inexplicable ability to bond with virtually any species, no matter how dangerous or incompatible they seemed on paper. Luis had been studying the Carvathi for 3 months now. The Carvathi were a feline-like species from the ice moon of Vexthar, covered in thick silvery fur and possessing retractable claws that could slice through reinforced steel. Adult Carvathi stood nearly 8 feet tall and weighed over 400 pounds of pure muscle. They were apex predators, evolved to hunt in packs across frozen tundras where temperatures regularly dropped to -70 degrees. The ship currently housed 52 Carvathi cubs, juveniles ranging from 6 months to 2 years old, along with their handlers and educators. The cubs were being prepared for integration into the Galactic Federation's educational programs, learning to socialize with other species before their predatory instincts became too deeply ingrained. Louisa had volunteered to help Luis with evening observations. She'd always been fascinated by the cubs, despite the warnings from the Carvathi handlers that humans were too small, too fragile, too warm-blooded to be trusted around their young. "They see you as prey," Handler Kreshna had warned, her golden eyes narrowing. "Or worse, as something to play with." But Louisa had watched Luis work with them for weeks. She'd seen how the cubs climbed on him, how they purred when he scratched behind their tufted ears, how they followed him around like he was one of their own. Humans had this gift, this ridiculous, beautiful gift, of making friends with anything that had eyes. Tonight, Luis had asked her to help monitor the cubs' sleeping patterns. The observation room adjacent to the cubs' den had comfortable floor cushions and monitoring equipment. The plan was simple: watch, take notes, stay quiet. What neither of them had anticipated was how exhausting the day had been. Louisa had spent 14 hours rerouting power conduits on Deck 7. Luis had been up since 0400 hours analyzing behavioral data. By 2300 hours, both humans were fighting to keep their eyes open. "Just 20 minutes, Louisa mumbled, curling up on one of the large floor cushions. Luis nodded, already half asleep himself against the opposite wall. The observation room's temperature was set to match the cubs' den, a crisp 15 degrees Celsius, perfect for Carvathi, but slightly chilly for humans accustomed to 22 degrees. At some point deep in her sleep cycle, Louisa shivered. Her subconscious mind, that primitive human hindbrain that had kept her ancestors alive through ice ages and long winter nights, registered the cold. The sound, barely a whisper, carried through the observation room's audio feed into the den. 52 pairs of ears perked up. The cubs had been dozing in their typical pile, a massive breathing mound of fur and claws and twitching tails. But that small, sad sound from the human, who always smelled like warmth and kindness and gave the best ear scratches, that required immediate action. The first cub, a 6-month-old named Pixtar with oversized paws and bright blue eyes, padded through the den's access door. The door was meant to be locked, but Luis had left it slightly ajar for emergency access. Pixtar pushed it open with ease. He approached Louisa carefully, sniffing at her dark hair. Then, with the gentleness that only a Carvathi cub protecting something precious could manage, he laid down across her legs. The second cub followed, then the third, then the fourth. By the time Luis jolted awake an hour later, rubbing his eyes and wondering why the monitoring equipment was beeping warnings about weight distribution, he couldn't see Louisa at all. Where she'd been sleeping was now a mountain of silver fur. 52 cubs had arranged themselves with mathematical precision, creating a living blanket that covered every inch of the human. Only the very top of her head was visible, her black hair peeking out from between two purring cubs. "Oh no," Luis whispered. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing through disaster scenarios. Suffocation, crushed ribs, internal bleeding. The cubs weighed between 15 and 30 pounds each. That was potentially over 1,000 pounds pressing down on a human who weighed maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. He activated his comm. "Medical emergency in observation 7. I need—" Luisa's muffled voice emerged from the pile. The pile shifted. Cubs tumbled gently to the sides as Luisa sat up, her hair sticking up at odd angles, her face flushed and confused. The cubs didn't scatter. Instead, they reorganized themselves, some draping across her lap, others pressing against her sides, all of them purring so loudly the room vibrated. Luis demanded, scanning her with his eyes for any signs of injury. "Can you breathe?" Luisa blinked, looking down at the sea of fur surrounding her. "I'm actually really warm. What?" "You talked in your sleep," Luis said weakly, watching as the cubs nuzzled against Luisa like she was their mother. Luisa's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She looked down at Pixtar, who was kneading her thigh with his paws, claws carefully retracted. Pixtar chirped, a high, happy sound, and headbutted her hand. "They piled on you," Luis confirmed. "All 52 of them. You've been buried under living blankets for—" The door burst open. Handler Krishna stormed in, followed by 3 other Karvathi adults and the ship's medical officer. They all froze at the sight before them. "The cubs were responding to distress calls." Krishna stopped mid-sentence. Her golden eyes went very wide. Luisa protested, though her voice was muffled by the cub that had decided her shoulder was the perfect pillow. Krishna looked like someone had just told her gravity had reversed. "They're predators, apex hunters. They should have—" She paused, watching as the cubs arranged themselves even more carefully around Luisa, ensuring she was completely surrounded by warmth, but never crushing her. "It's humans," the medical officer, a crystalline Zelthari named Shimmer, said softly. "They do this. We've documented it 1,700 times across 40 species. Humans complain about cold, heat, hunger, loneliness." Luis knelt down next to the pile, unable to stop smiling. "How do you feel?" Luisa considered this carefully. She was warm, almost too warm. She was definitely squished. There was cub drool on her shoulder and something that might have been a tail tickling her ear. She'd never felt safer in her life. "I feel loved," she said simply. The cubs purred in unison, a sound like distant thunder, like the engine of the universe itself humming in contentment. Handler Krishna made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You humans," she said, shaking her massive head. "You beautiful, ridiculous, impossible creatures." Luis grinned. And somewhere in the depths of space, on a ship full of 100 different species all learning to live together, 52 Karvathi cubs had decided that humans, especially this human, were worth protecting, worth warming, worth keeping safe. After all, she'd said she was cold, and they couldn't let that stand.